guys step out. I don't know if we're flexible with time. Hello, everyone. My name is... Welcome, everyone. My name is Nathan Marriott. I'm the president of Pi Sigma Epsilon, the business fraternity putting on this event. I wanted to personally welcome you all on behalf of our fraternity and give you guys a little bit of information about us. Like I said before, our fraternity is Pi Sigma Epsilon. We are a sales, marketing, and management fraternity. However, we are open to all majors. On this campus, we are the largest business fraternity, which gives us a lot of advantages with events. It allows us to put on events like this, huge networking events and stuff like that, to mingle you with the greatest people in Muncie and the greatest business owners from all around Indiana and the United States. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Andrew Ratton here in just a second to thank our sponsors. But I wanted to say, as everyone funnels in, if we could please keep quiet, as we are bringing David Casey out on stage in a second, and we don't want anybody to miss anything important. Thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Ratton, and I'm a fellow brother of Pi Sigma Epsilon. And before we get started tonight, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize some amazing sponsors that we have. And we'll go ahead and start off. So we have The Haven, Internex, Prime Trust Financial, Stoops Automotive, the Ball State Student Government Association, the Miller College of Business, Advanced Science and Graphics, State Farm, and finally, the Ball State Federal Credit Union. And also, I just want to recognize some special people that helped to make tonight possible. And we have Vanessa Lobby and Dean Bott. And we also really want to welcome a special welcome to President Mearns for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I'd like to introduce David Casey. David served as a Marine in Desert Storm. He went on from there to serve many roles in HR, including a position as a recruiting advertising executive. He moved on from this to WellPoint, to CVS, where he's widely known as a thought leader in his field. Currently, he works at CVS Health as the Chief Diversity Officer, VP of Workforce Strategies, and President of the CVS Health Employee Relief Fund. At CVS, he has established their strategic diversity framework and led the workforce initiative to help over 100,000 people come off of government assistance. Him and his team's accomplishments have been recognized by the White House and many external agencies for best practice in diversity leadership. You'll be hearing from David on how to win in a diverse marketplace, and afterwards there'll be a time to ask questions. So now, please help me in welcoming David Casey, Chief Diversity Officer of CVS Health.
Good evening, Ball State. How are you? Good, good. Let me start off by saying a quick thank you to President Mearns, to Dean Bott, and a special thank you to Jeff Lackey for inviting me here. And thank you for all of you for coming out on a cold and somewhat treacherous night here in Indiana. I'm actually from Indiana. I've been living in Rhode Island for the past 8 years, just moved back to Indiana, but I'm spending the winters in Florida. So I gave up 75-degree weather and sunshine to come up here and be with you tonight. So, but I'm very much looking forward to the dialogue, and I really hope it's just that. I know we have a large room. There are a lot of people in here. I've got some slides to go through. PowerPoint is my crutch. I can't do a presentation without slides, so I have a couple slides to go through. But I really hope that we can use the slides and the comments that I'm going to make as a precursor to our conversation. I really hope that you've come prepared tonight to engage in a dialogue. The topic of diversity is one that's, it's very much a hot topic right now. I was sharing with Dean Bott earlier, it's everywhere. You can't go anywhere without running across an issue related to diversity. So what I do for a living has certainly gotten a lot of traction over the past couple of years. So exactly what does a chief diversity officer do? I've been doing this work now for almost 20 years, and my family is still asking me that question, exactly what do you do every day? In essence, my team and I serve as internal consultants and subject matter experts on helping CVS Health deliver on 4 strategic objectives around diversity. The first one is to make sure that we have a workforce that's reflective of the patients and the communities that we serve. Now, being that we're a company of 250,000 employees and that we touch about 6 million patients or customers every single day, that means that our workforce should pretty much be reflective of the U.S. population, so that's one of our goals. Another strategic objective is to make sure that we have an inclusive culture. The term inclusion, having inclusive cultures, it's a very popular term right now. What does it mean? For us, it means that we want to make sure we have the kind of work environment where everyone can bring their whole selves to work, and quite frankly, an environment where the company is tapping into the insights and perspectives of everybody who works for us. The third objective is ensuring that everyone has equitable access to growth and development in the organization once they get there, regardless of their background. And the fourth objective, which I find to be some of the most challenging and the most exciting, is what we refer to as marketplace diversity. And that's making sure that we can meet or exceed the needs of what we call the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are our customers on the B2C side of our business, the business to consumer side. Most of you are probably familiar with the roughly 10,000 pharmacies that we have, retail pharmacies we have around the country. So we have to meet and exceed the needs of an increasingly diverse patient and consumer base from that standpoint. The next C is our clients. We do have a B2B side of our business. We do pharmacy benefits management for a number of clients around the country, so we have to meet and exceed the needs of their diverse workforces. The next C is our communities, and we want to make sure, we strive to make sure we're a good corporate citizen in the communities in which we do business. And then the last C is all other constituents. That last C is purposefully broad, and I'll tell you again, that's where I draw a lot of my excitement, that's where a lot of my challenges come into place. There are a lot of external constituents to CVS Health that have an interest or a stake in how well we manage diversity. It could be investors, it could be regulators, it could be legislators, it could be suppliers. Again, it could be the communities we serve, it could be activists. And I engage all of them. A typical day for me could be engaging somebody at the White House. Under President Obama's administration, I think I attended 8 meetings at the White House over 8 years related to different topics that had to do with diversity. And then in the next half hour, I could be talking to our chief medical officer about health disparities and how we're going to meet the needs of underserved communities from a healthcare perspective. The next half hour, I may be talking to a colleague on an issue where they feel like they weren't heard or they weren't valued, or somehow or the other we have a diversity challenge there. The next half hour, I may be on the phone with an activist like a Reverend Al Sharpton or Reverend Jesse Jackson. So no 2 days are ever the same for me as a chief diversity officer. So for me to explain what I do for a living on a daily basis gets to be pretty difficult. But what I want to share with you tonight is hopefully a different way of thinking and talking about diversity. I think one of our biggest challenges and one of our biggest struggles in having productive dialogue about this word, when you say the word diversity, all kinds of things conjure up for people. People tense up, they get emotional. They're not really sure how to deal with topics related to diversity, or quite frankly, they're not even sure how they define it. So hopefully I'm going to help you broaden and expand your thinking and how you define diversity and how you can maximize the potential of diversity in both your personal and professional lives. And I'll certainly share with you how we tackle that at CVS. So before I begin, I want to ask a question. I think I can see you pretty well out there. Who knows what the letter CVS stands for? I see one hand up. I don't know if I see any others. Anybody know what the letter CVS stands for? I see you. It was a question on Jeopardy not too long ago. So obviously none of you watch Jeopardy except you. What does CVS stand for?
Isn't it convenience store?
Oh, no. You're kind of right, but it actually stands for Consumer Value Stores. CVS was founded in 1963 in Lowell, Massachusetts, selling beauty products, and we've certainly grown into the company we are today. But I'll tell you, as I mentioned, that was a Jeopardy question. So if any of you are ever on a game show and you're asked that question and you win some money, I'm going to now expect a cut, because now that I've given you the answer. So CVS, as I mentioned, many people know us or think of us as our pharmacies. That's a big part of our business. But we are much more than that. As a matter of fact, and we'll get into the definition of diversity here in a second, but when people ask me how well does CVS Health manage diversity, I begin with the story of who we are as a company. In 2008, which preceded my time with the company, I joined the company in 2010, but in 2008, CVS Pharmacies and Caremark came together. CVS Pharmacies is a pharmacy retailer where we wanted people to come in, we still want people to come into our stores, engage in the products we have in the front store, plus get their prescriptions at the pharmacy counter. Caremark, on the other hand, is a company that was built, a big part of the business model is getting prescriptions by mail order for cost savings and convenience. So when CVS Pharmacies and Caremark came together in 2008, the street and the market said, what are you doing? That makes absolutely no sense. Why would you take these two diametrically opposed business models, or so they view them as such, and bring them together underneath one umbrella? So when I get to our definition of diversity, this will make a lot of sense, but what the company did in essence was they managed through a diversity challenge, right? We had two seemingly opposing business models that we brought together, and that allowed us to achieve breakthrough innovation in the marketplace and market disruption that no one else had ever seen before. Let me give you a quick example, then I'll move on. As a result of bringing those two business models together, we launched a product called Maintenance Choice, where if you normally get your prescriptions by mail order, and let's say you're traveling to come visit me down in Tampa, Florida, and you forgot your prescriptions, you can go into if you're enrolled in Maintenance Choice, you can go into a CVS to get you a prescription. You can get your refill. You can get enough to hold you over until you can get back home. And vice versa. If you normally get your scripts in one of our stores and you're traveling somewhere and you forgot your script, you can get a refill mailed to you if you're enrolled in Maintenance Choice. So what the company did was we worked through tensions and complexities related to our differences, focused on our similarities, and created a company like no other. And we've continued to build upon that today. So when people ask me how well our company manages diversity, they think I'm going to lead with the story about how many women we have and how many people of color we have. And while that is a part of our diversity story, that's not all there is to it. That's not how we define diversity. And again, I'll share that with you here in a second. We went through some rebranding in 2014. And that was the same year that we became the first retail pharmacy to stop offering tobacco in our stores. That was a significant business decision for us. It was a $2 billion loss in revenue, but we knew that if we were going to evolve and become a healthcare company, we couldn't sell tobacco. Now, people have said, well, you still sell snacks, you still sell, soda and candy bars in the front store. Well, here's the thing about that. That stuff in moderation won't kill you. There is no safe amount of tobacco for individuals to use. So when we made that decision in 2014, we also rebranded who we were as a company. CVS Caremark was our parent name, but we changed the name of the company to CVS Health. And as such, we started to evolve into a healthcare company, and we had to decide, we had a mission, vision, and values, right? So some of you may have already had some work experience in corporate America through internships, through actual jobs. Many of you are going to be going out to corporate America. You're going to come across companies that have a mission, they're going to have a vision, they're going to have values. We had that. And we said, you know what, we don't think that's strong enough. We don't think that accurately portrays why we exist. So we came up with the purpose statement, and that purpose statement was meant to articulate what would be the gap left in society if CVS Health didn't exist anymore. And that purpose statement is, our purpose is to help people on their path to better health. Certainly other companies can do that, but no other companies can do it with the range of assets that we pull together underneath one roof, okay? So thank you for indulging me in my 2-minute conversation of CVS Health and my 2-minute commercial of CVS Health. Now we're going to jump into the meat of our conversation tonight. So I'd like to start off with a little exercise, and I'm going to ask you, if you can just raise your hands, actually, since the group is so loud or so large, please shout out if any of you have any guesses who this young lady is, who this little girl is. Feel free to just shout it out. I heard Shirley Temple. Any other guesses? Who was that? The founder of CVS? The founder of CVS was a dude. But good guess. I will tell you, I'm not going to keep you in suspense because you won't guess. You won't know who it is unless you're related to me. This is my great aunt. It's my maternal grandmother's sister, or one of her sisters. As a matter of fact, they had quite a few siblings, and many of them were very fair complexioned, and many of them had rather straight hair or loosely curled hair. Now, outside of the context of my picture being next to her and me telling you that we're related, whether or not you even had a name to us, and Shirley Temple, by the way, is what I get the most often, and it depends on the age of the crowd. The younger the crowd gets, I don't get Shirley Temple so much because people don't know who she is. So thank you for her. Whoever said that's probably over 40. Good job. Outside of the context of me telling you that she's related to me, most of you, whether you thought about it consciously or subconsciously, probably thought or assumed that as we define it in the United States, she's Caucasian. But quite the opposite by law, she was defined or categorized as African American. And there are quite a few people who were in similar situations as her and her siblings that, quite frankly, looked how we define white or Caucasian in the U.S. And there still is a practice or a phenomenon in the black community or African American community of individuals who look like my great aunt, who would engage in what they call passing, right? Where they live their lives as a Caucasian American in the U.S. And they live what however you might want to define the Caucasian or white experience in the U.S. So the reason I like to start off with this little exercise is to, right out of the gates, get us to challenge our thinking about how we define diversity and, quite frankly, how we define each other. So what makes her black? The law made her black, and over the years, there have been a number of variables as to how the country has sought to define who people are by their ethnicity. And I'll tell you a little bit why I don't like to use the term race, but by law, she was black. But what makes her black? It's not her skin color. She looks very different than me. You might look at me and assume that I'm black, right? Most of you probably do assume that I'm black. And let me let you in on a little secret. I'm 49 years old. I do identify myself as African American and or black, but this is who I am. I had the ability or the opportunity a couple of years ago, probably about 5 years ago, to take one of the 23andMe DNA tests. Has anybody in here done one of those tests? Something similar? It's quite phenomenal, and it just it blew my mind when I got the results back because I saw some stuff in there I really did not expect. So this is who I am. 84.1% sub-Saharan African, 13.7% European, 1.7% East Asian and Native American, and 0.2% South Asian, and then some other stuff. So all of it equals 100% me. When I got these results back, it really challenged me to think about how I identify myself as a person. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I do still identify myself as black or African American, but I'm still struggling with that. You know, how do I think about, how do I define the other 15% of who I am, right? What the 23andMe results told me were that my mom's genetic DNA originated in sub-Saharan Africa, migrated through Asia, and then through Europe, and then to the U.S. My father's genetic DNA originated on the west coast of Africa and came straight to the U.S., presumably through slavery. I haven't actually been able to trace my family history back that long to see all the names and understand who these people are. But that's my genetic DNA track to get to the United States. So what if everybody knew their numbers? And I don't know if there are any biology majors in here, but more and more research of late is showing and validating that there is no biological validity to what we call race, right? So if anybody in here can tell me what one gene that all people of any racial category that we define in the U.S. all have in common, I will give you $100. I'll have to go to the ATM. I don't have it on me, but I will give you $100. So for example, if you say all black people, what does that mean? What one gene do all black people have in common that no other group shares with black people? Is it the gene for skin color? I already showed you my great aunt, so I think you can surmise that the answer to that is no. Is it the gene for lip shape? Is it the gene for nose shape? Is it the gene for hair texture, for those of us who still have it? Right? Give me one gene that everybody in the group that we call black or African American all have in common. The truth is, 80% of the world's genetic DNA all lies on the continent of Africa. We have way more in common as people than we have in difference. But how much time do we spend trying to figure out how to separate ourselves into different categories, right? How many of you, you may not know this, but I oversee the affirmative action and EEO programs at CVS Health as well, and there is a difference between that and diversity. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But there is a government regulation. We are a federal contractor. We do business with the federal government, so we're required by law to report the workforce demographics of our company to the government. There is a federal regulation that says if one of our colleagues, as we call our employees, does not give us their ethnicity, we by law are required to go to their manager, have their manager make a visual observance of them, and tell us what ethnicity we think they are, or that they think they are. So we spend an inordinate amount of time, energy, and effort trying to figure out how to separate ourselves into different boxes when the truth is we have a lot more alike. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean to underscore the impact of this thing that we've built and designed called race in the U.S. The historical impacts, the societal impacts are extremely real and extremely impactful. And there are some very challenging and complex things happening in the world today, as President Mearns and I were talking about backstage. So the impact of this thing that we've created called race is very, very real. But biologically, it has no validity whatsoever. You know, when President Obama got elected, there was a lot of discourse about how he identified himself. And he chose to identify himself as black or African American. And for those of you, I think all of you probably know, his mother is white and his father is black, he's African. But he chose to identify himself, instead of identifying as multiracial or biracial, he said, no, I'm going to identify myself as being black. That's his choice, right? But a lot of people were frustrated with that. They were angry with that. They were like, well, no, you're biracial. You know, you're not just black. You shouldn't identify as such. You know why he decided to do that? He said, I'm going to identify myself based on my experience in the United States. I lived the quote-unquote black experience, however that's defined for a number of people, so I'm going to identify myself as such, right? So this is not easy, it's not complex, but the point I want to make is that we are all genetically a lot more alike than we are different. But we spend a lot of time focusing on how we can define ourselves as being different than one another. So I'm going to jump quickly to a little bit about how we define this work at CVS Health, how we approach this work. I think the theme of our time together is how to win in diverse markets. So I think understanding all this stuff is critical to that, but I also want to share with you a little bit how we approach it at CVS.
Our commitment to diversity management is strategic and visionary. Our diversity management strategy spurs innovation. It leverages the differences and similarities among our colleagues and provides an environment that empowers everyone. Our leaders understand the importance of cultivating a diverse workforce that fosters creativity, enhances problem solving, and reflects the diversity of our patients and customers. Managing diversity is about educating, equipping, and empowering our colleagues to best serve our communities and to help people on their path to better health. Words in there that we'll talk about here in a little bit as I dig deeper into the definition.
As a matter of fact, having seen our company logo up there, just reminded me, I was notified backstage right before I came out that I've got some CVS colleagues here. Where are they? All right, hey, hey, Andy, how are you? Oh, wow, I really need to be on my P's and Q's now, huh? I've got coworkers here. Also, too, I'm just going to warn you, I don't know how many of you grew up in the Baptist church, but I'm like a Baptist preacher. Once I get going, I start getting sweaty and hot, and I have to pull out my hanky and dab my forehead. And I've got no water retention mechanism up here, so once I start sweating, it just comes down. But so hey, thanks for coming out. I appreciate seeing you. You can correct me if I say anything incorrectly. I was very pleased to see the diversity and inclusion statement on Ball State's website, and I will be very interested when we get to the Q&A section to really hear, how you experience that here on campus, and quite frankly, what role that you all see yourselves playing in making that statement come true. So very encouraged to see that. As I mentioned, I think one of the biggest challenges we have in this work, and one of the reasons why we're still having the same old tired conversations about diversity that we've been having for 60, 70 years, this is not new. It's not rocket science either. I like to make people think it's rocket science, but it really isn't. IBM, as early as the 1940s, had programs in place targeted to get more women and people of color in their company. So and here we are in 2018, we're still having the same conversations. So it's not new. But I think the reason why we keep having the same recycled conversations is that we're not very, very clear about what we're even talking about. If I say the word diversity and I ask 10 people to define the word diversity, I'm probably going to get 14 different answers because we're not on the same page. I had the good fortune of being mentored by the late Dr. R. Roosevelt Thomas Jr., who many people consider to be the founding father of diversity management in corporate America. He was African American, a Morehouse grad, and wrote his thesis on diversity during the 60s. So most people would imagine or would guess that his thesis was going to be on the civil rights movement. And no, his thesis on diversity management was about how to help different business functions work more effectively and efficiently together. So how do you help the operations team deliver on what the sales team is out there saying they can do, right, Andy? So that was his thesis, was on how to help business units work more effectively and efficiently together. That was his diversity management thesis. The definition that he wrote and authored and that I've used for the past 20 years is that, there are some key words in here, diversity is any collective mixture that's characterized by differences and their similarities. How often when we have the diversity discussion do we stop at differences? We never even get to the similarities part. So it's any collective mixture characterized by differences, similarities, and their related tensions and complexities. Not a very sexy definition, not even very aspirational, quite frankly, but it's very purposeful, and it's very meaningful when you think about the words in that definition. Any collective mixture. Is race or ethnicity and gender in there? Absolutely. Is it much more broad than that? Absolutely. And another key part of that definition is complexities and tensions. So why aren't more of us good at managing diversity on a personal level or a corporate level? Raise your hand if you willingly and enthusiastically invite more tensions and complexities into your life. Nobody wants tensions and complexities. But the truth is, the more diversity you have, the more tension and complexity you're going to have. It's a natural byproduct. And guess what? If you are going to be if you're going to work in an innovative organization, or you're trying to foster creativity, you can't get there without tension and complexity. If you're surrounded by a bunch of people, who all think the same, who all came from the same background, who all have had the same experiences, tell me how you're going to get new and fresh ideas. As a matter of fact, some of you may remember, there were a number of companies that engaged in bad behavior, probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit more so. Tyco was one of the companies, and this is not to beat up on any one company, but there were case studies that were done on all these companies that were getting in trouble. So Tyco and some of their other corporate peers, they were doing things like giving their boards of directors forgivable loans for hundreds of millions of dollars, and just a number of unethical behaviors they were engaged in. So there were some folks that did a study of their boards of directors, and they were predominantly all white male. And this is not to beat up on white men. There are a few good white men out there. I know a couple like Andy and some others. But this is not to beat up on white men, but the purpose of that research was that the boards of directors are very homogeneous. There was nobody on those boards of directors who was raising their hand to say, I don't think this is right. That's not my experience. I can guarantee you, as I mentioned, I'm from Indianapolis originally, and I grew up in the hood. If somebody told me they were going to give me $200 million and I didn't have to give it back, I would have been like, no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. But what happened was they didn't have people sitting around the table who would challenge those behaviors and who would challenge those practices that they engaged in. So that's where the value, that's where the strength of diversity is. It's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It's making sure that you invite tensions and complexities into your environment, because that's the only way you're going to be able to remain relevant in this dynamically changing marketplace today. Oh, one other quick thing I want to reference as far as definitions are concerned. So what is my goal as a Chief Diversity Officer? It's to educate, equip, and empower all 250,000 of our employees to make quality decisions in the midst of tensions and complexities that come with diversity, right? That's my goal. I had someone come up to me, not at CVS, this was a while ago, after 9/11, and a guy worked for a company, and he said, I want to get your thoughts on the situation I'm having. I've got a black female employee who works for my team, and I've got a white openly gay employee, and they're berating and harassing a female Muslim employee who's on my team. This was shortly after 9/11. And he said, what would you recommend? Or would you come in and do some consulting with us? Would you help me get rid of the tension on my team? And I said, if you're looking for somebody to come in and get rid of tension, you're asking the wrong person to do the wrong thing, because that's not what I do. I don't get rid of tension. What's the easiest way to get rid of tension? Get rid of diversity. So when you think about the fact that in Fortune 500 companies today in 2018, less than 5% of C-level jobs, being chief whatever, chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief information officer, whatever chief you want to throw in there. Less than 5% of those jobs are filled by women or people of color in 2018. And how long again have we been talking about this? Why is that? Is that because corporate America is primarily run by racist or sexist men? I don't think so. I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't some racists or sexist in corporate America and every other segment of society. But I think the majority of it, again, goes back to the fact that people inherently want to surround themselves by people who are most like them, because that's comfortable, that's easy. But again, it doesn't spur creativity or innovation. So one of my peers at a technology company got into a little bit of a public fervor not too long ago. This company ran an ad that was meant to speak about the diversity of the organization. And they didn't have many people who looked that different in the ad. So social media did what social media does, right? People started going after the ad saying, you know, this is crap. You say you're committed to diversity. You can't even put diversity in your ads. I don't see it in this picture, blah, blah, blah. So let me ask you a couple questions. You don't have to raise your hand or shout this out, but I'm just going to ask you to think about a couple things about this picture. Tell me in this picture who's a Christian. Tell me in this picture who's a Muslim. Tell me in this picture who identifies as Asian. Tell me in this picture who identifies as Hispanic. Tell me in this picture who's transgender. Tell me in this picture who's heterosexual. Tell me in this picture who's a military veteran. Tell me who has either a visible or non-visible disability. Those are all aspects of diversity. So when this technology company ran the ad, I understood where the sentiment came from people who criticized it. But again, we're getting the language wrong. What the ad lacked was representation. You have no way of knowing by looking at a group of people how much diversity is in that group. You have no way. One of those individuals could identify as African American, quite frankly. We talked about that a little bit, right? So I remember earlier on, this was probably about 15 years ago, I went into a business meeting with a group of leaders, and this was in New Hampshire, and not to beat up on New Hampshire, but I walked in the room, and there were probably about 60 people in the room, and they were predominantly white men. I'd say probably 90% of the room were white men. So in walks this 6'3", couple pounds lighter, still bald, good-looking guy, to talk about diversity. You could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. They didn't know what to expect. So what I said was, look, you can have a room of 40 white men under the age of 40 and still have incredible diversity. And there was a collective sigh of, oh, wow, we never thought of it that way. What you might lack is representation, but I have no way of knowing what people's sexual orientation is, what their socioeconomic status is, what their educational attainment level is. That's all diversity, right? So the reason I say this, and I'll move on because I just got a flashcard that I need to move on. My point around all this is we're never going to get better at it until we get the language right. And I think you all, embarking upon your careers, going into a professional environment, can help us start to get the language right. The world's going to be a much different place for you all in 10 years of being in the workforce than it is today. By the year 2050, it's estimated that the U.S. is going to be a minority-majority country, which means that more than 50% of people in the United States are going to identify as something other than Caucasian or white. And I remember sharing that stat on a social media post, and this guy said to me, I can't believe your company allows you to talk that way. And I said, I'm just stating a fact. I mean, I don't really know what's your concern or what the issue is, right? So I think we all have an opportunity to get better at it if we can get the language right. A couple things I would suggest you take a look at when you get a chance. One is a PBS series. Has anybody in here seen the PBS series, Race, the Power of an Illusion? It's very, very powerful. I think there are 5 or 6 episodes in this series, but they chronicle in the history of the United States how we have struggled to define race. And it's very interesting. I mean, at one point, we thought that anyone who was non-white was inherently biologically inferior, right? You were going to be plagued by health issues. You were just completely biologically inferior to people identified as white. Then Jesse Owens came along, and he just blew everybody off the stage at the Olympics. And then the narrative changed to, oh my gosh, African Americans must have some biological phenomena that makes them genetically or biologically superior. They're better athletes. I think there was a study done that yielded a result or they thought that we had some kind of extra bone, or there was something special about our muscles just by inherently being African American or black. So the narrative shifted within the course of a couple of decades from being biologically inferior to being biologically superior. And a lot of these were government-sanctioned studies and the government-sanctioned narrative, right, to really try to figure out how to identify ourselves. So if you take a look at Race, the Power of an Illusion, there's some very interesting dialogue in there, and my jaw just hit the floor, because a lot of this history I never knew or I never understood. So please take a look at that, and I think it will shed some light, if you believe the science. It'll shed some light on, again, the biological invalidity of race. And Michael Fosberg is a guy I had the opportunity to meet about a decade ago. And Michael has a very interesting story. I won't give you too much of a spoiler alert. But he was born to a white mother. I believe, if I get the story right, she was of Eastern European descent, and a black father. And at the time, his mother was very young, and her family and parents did not approve of the relationship. So they gave her an ultimatum. They said, you can either stay with him or you can choose us. If you choose us, we'll, help you take care of the baby, that's fine. But we do not approve of the relationship, so either him or us. She was young, she was scared, she had no money, she didn't know what to do. She chose her family. That's what she knew. That was comfort for her. So Michael had no idea he was half black until he was in his early 20s. So, he would joke about during the summertime, he thought it was kind of interesting or odd that he could tan a lot quicker and easier than a lot of the other kids. And, his hair was a little curlier, but he didn't make anything of it. He thought that he was, quote unquote, white until he was like 23 or 24 years old. And then he found out that he has this whole other half of his family that's defined as black. So he has a very powerful, very entertaining story. He does a one-man show where he plays all the characters of people in his family, and he kind of lives out that storyline. I'm going to skip through a couple of these. I think this is important. You all are going to be going into an environment where you're, in many cases, going to be the low man or woman on the totem pole, right? Because you're going to be starting out your careers. I'm going to give you a little secret that's going to make you sound like the smartest person in the room. So write this down, take a picture, Snapchat it, Facebook it, whatever you're going to do with it. 4 questions. Now, nobody likes the smartest person in the room, so don't go in thinking you're the smartest person, and definitely don't say you're the smartest person in the room. But if you ask these 4 questions, you're going to sound like the smartest person in the room. If you want to understand or assess an organization's commitment to diversity, ask these 4 questions. They're in no particular order, right? But most people tend to start with, do we have the right mix of people? Because that's kind of easy. You can count heads. It's easy to figure out how much of this we have, how much of that we have. So ask the organization, based on what we're trying to accomplish, do we have all the people around the table that we need to have to remain relevant, right? The next question, do we have an inclusive culture? Once we go out and bring all these different people into the company, do we have the kind of company culture where they're going to want to stay? And quite frankly, where they can fully contribute regardless of their background. The third question is, does everyone in the organization have an equitable opportunity for growth and development? And then the fourth question is, are we meeting or exceeding the needs of all of our external stakeholders? Who are we missing in the marketplace? If you ask those 4 questions, you're going to be able to ascertain whether or not an organization is holistically looking to manage diversity. Most companies or organizations, when you think about diversity or diversity and inclusion, they spend their time here. Do we have the right mix of people? They spend their time here. They spend their time here. But the difference between diversity management and affirmative action and EEO is right here. If we do all of that stuff, but we're not doing it in a way that's going to help us keep the lights on, it doesn't matter. Let me give you a quick example. I had a gentleman come to me in Denver, and he said, I'm really struggling. My competitors are eating my lunch because I cannot tap into the Hispanic and Latino marketplace. And this was, again, probably about 14, 15 years ago. So my first question was, okay, at that time, many immigrants in the Hispanic and Latino community were first-generation immigrants, so English was not their primary language. I said, do you have a workforce that can literally serve that customer base you say you want? Do you have a workforce that can even speak Spanish to the customers you're trying to get? The answer was no. So we put a strategy in place to help them recruit more Hispanic and Latinos to the company. Then what we realized was we were bringing a different group into the company that was pretty homogeneous for many years as far as ethnicity is concerned. So we had to make sure that we put things in place to make sure that we were building an inclusive culture. The third piece of it, when we think about equitable growth, equitable access to growth and development, we said, look, we put a lot of focus on bringing in entry-level talent to help you serve your customers, but what about the people managing them? You know, this individual didn't understand the nuance of the Hispanic and Latino community. He didn't understand that in many of their countries of origin, they were business owners. They were entrepreneurs, and now they're working for you. You need to understand how to manage through that dynamic. And quite frankly, we also need to hire some Hispanic and Latino managers, not just entry-level or frontline people. And at the end of the day, why did we do all of that? We did that to make sure that he can gain the Hispanic and Latino market share that he sought to gain. And why do I share this with you? Again, when people say that they want to engage or need to engage in diversity management, it's not just for the sake of feeling good. You know, we had, in that particular company, we had a salsa making contest during Hispanic Heritage Month. And one of the non-Hispanic and Latino employees said, this is stupid. I don't know, why are we making salsa? Who cares about salsa? What does this have to do with anything? You know what the #1 selling condiment was that year in the U.S. that had taken over ketchup or any other condiment? Salsa, right? So what that individual didn't understand was that the world is changing around you, and you can either engage in it or you can get run over by it. It wasn't about the chips and dip, right? It was about understanding the culture that was going to be a much more impactful part of that workplace and that consumer market. How am I doing on time? Doing okay? Okay. So again, if you go back to this model, if you ask these 4 questions, and by the way, I was talking about the smartest person in the room. I hope you know this, and if you don't, please know it as you embark upon your professional careers. The smartest person in the room isn't the one who has all the answers. The smartest person in the room isn't the one doing all the talking. The smartest person in the room is the person who asks the right questions, right? So if you want to show up and have people believe that you are the smartest person in the room, learn to ask the right questions. And I guarantee you these 4 questions are the right ones when you think about diversity. This book is hot off the presses, Radical Inclusion, written by General Martin Dempsey, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I had the opportunity and the pleasure of meeting General Dempsey a couple of years ago, and Ori Braffman is a New York Times best-selling author and a Berkeley professor. So right then and there, that's an exercise in diversity that I would never expect those two to come together to author a book on leadership. But radical inclusion just came out a couple weeks ago, and I love this definition of inclusion that they have in the book. The kind of inclusion we're talking about isn't necessarily about admission, it's about participation. I was talking to Paris earlier. I don't know if Paris is in here, but we're both basketball fans. Oh, there he is. So pardon the basketball analogy for those of you who aren't. But another analogy I use to help define inclusion is that diversity is recruiting all the right people to be on your team. You know, you have a point guard, you have a power forward, you have a center, whatever. Inclusion is actually allowing them to play in the game. So you can go to work for an organization that may be engaging in window dressing as it relates to diversity. Maybe they're inviting the right people to be on the team, but how are they enabling the right people to play in the game? And I'm going to finish with how will you know this, what good looks like? The first step of recognizing whether or not a person or a company is diversity mature, do they accept being diversity challenged? We are all diversity challenged. I've been doing this work for 20 years and I'm diversity challenged. I'll share a quick story with you and then I'm going to make sure I stay on time here. This is when I lived in Indiana before. I was getting on an airplane to take a trip, and I grew up in Indiana. I was part of court-ordered busing in the early 80s. I got bused out to Decatur Central. I lived in Center Township in Indianapolis. So we weren't welcomed out in Decatur Central at that time. I was getting on a plane to take a trip, and this young lady sat next to me, and she was wearing denim overalls, and she had 2 braided blonde pigtails. And I'm sitting here looking at her, and I'm thinking, she is probably going to really hate sitting next to me, based on my experiences in Indiana. I'm thinking she's probably going to raise her hand to ask the flight attendant if she can sit in another seat. So, boy, did she prove me wrong. We engaged in a conversation. I found out that she had just come back from a missions trip in Africa with her church, and she had fallen in love with a gentleman on that missions trip who happened to be African American. He was from the United States, and her family and her church congregation disowned her for that. They excommunicated her or whatever. They shunned her. So we ended up having one of the most profound conversations that I've ever had in my life, but I almost missed out on that interaction because I looked at her, I stereotyped her, and I made some assumptions about her that turned out to be completely false. And I do this for a living, folks. So everybody is diversity challenged. I can guarantee you that. You all have biases. And again, we don't have the time to go into it today. Maybe if President Mearns and Dean Bott and Jeff want to invite me back, we can have a part 2 of this conversation. But if your brain functions as a normal brain functions, you are biased. It's part of the human condition. So the first step is to acknowledge that. Then recognize the cost of being diversity challenged. If you are diversity challenged but you don't care, and your organization doesn't care, you're not going to be good at managing diversity. Accept your responsibility. It is not my job to manage diversity for CVS Health. It's not the CEO's job. It's not the head of HR's job. It's all 250,000 of our employees' job to manage diversity. Demonstrate contextual knowledge. Rising tides raise all ships. You have to be able to articulate the benefit to the entire organization. Act on the basis of requirements. This is key. This is where we get ourselves into trouble, right here. We make decisions based on 3 things: preferences, traditions, and convenience. The way we like things, the way we've always done things, and the way it's easiest to do things. But if we can get focused on making decisions around requirements, you're going to inherently be good at managing diversity. I had a gentleman tell me when I was responsible for running college recruiting at another company. He said, I only want to hire Notre Dame grads, Notre Dame MBAs. He went to Notre Dame and he got his MBA from Notre Dame. So he knew what to expect from a Notre Dame MBA. And I kind of chuckled. I'm like, oh, you can't be serious. But he was dead serious. He was making decisions that weren't even remotely based on requirements. So if you can get past all the other noise and the other stuff around traditions, preferences, and conveniences and focus on requirements, you're going to be good at managing diversity. Challenge conventional wisdom. I call this having courageous conversations. Don't be afraid to go against the flow. Engage in continuous learning. No one knows it all. I learn something new almost every day. And by the way, I make a mistake almost every day. And again, I do this work for 20 years. I've been doing it for 20 years. It's not if you're going to make a mistake, it's when. And then cope with the dynamics of diversity. I talked about leaning in to diversity tension instead of trying to back away from it. And I think I'm really pushing our time here, so I'm going to stop talking. so we can engage in dialogue. What I wanted to do, and hopefully I've done it, was to plant a seed. I didn't come here tonight to answer every question for you. Quite frankly, I hope that I generated more questions for you than provided answers, because that's how I think we engage in productive dialogue. So I'm hoping, now we're at the point that we're at a time for Q&A, and I'm hoping that you all came prepared to ask some questions. I love being on a college environment, because this is where new ideas get created, and this is where old ideas get challenged. So hopefully you all came prepared to engage in the dialogue and ask some questions and maybe share your perspective on any topical issues related to diversity or anything that I've shared with you tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I think we have a live mic down here. If anybody wants to come down and either share a perspective or ask a question, I'm happy to engage in that. And Jeff did tell me to start calling on people if nobody came down. So I've got a laser pointer here. I'll single you out. No questions? I know it can be a little intimidating to ask a question in front of a large group. You all comfortable with diversity? Did I tell you everything about diversity you wanted to know but were afraid to ask? First victim.
What do you look forward to most in the future of diversity management?
What do I look forward to the most in the future of diversity management? Quite frankly, as I tried to share with you tonight, I look forward to getting the language right. Because I think as long as we keep confusing diversity with affirmative action and EEO, we're going to keep having the same circular, unproductive conversations. I've heard people say, I am so sick and tired of talking about diversity. And I'm like, really? So you're sick and tired of trying to learn how to make better decisions in the midst of tensions and complexities related to similarities and differences. You're tired of that? You might be tired of affirmative action for whatever reason. You might be tired of EEO for whatever reason. But how can you get tired of talking about diversity? So until we get the language right, I don't think we're going to be having the same conversation long after I'm dead and gone. So that's what I hope to change. I hope to change the dialogue by making sure we get the language right. Thank you. Thank you for give her a hand for being brave enough to be the first one. Yeah.
What are some of CVS's long-term goals in terms of diversity, and how do you hope to kind of inspire other companies to kind of follow in your track?
Yeah, I think the question was, what is one of CVS's long-term goals as it relates to diversity, and how do we hope to inspire other companies to follow, the path that we're taking? And I go back to, again, demonstrating how you can approach diversity from a broader definition, and quite frankly, how you can leverage diversity to grow the business. You remember the story I led with, how we brought these disparate business units together underneath one umbrella, focused on a common objective. If we can get other companies to understand that definition and that process of diversity management, I think the conversation will go a lot farther. Now, don't get me wrong again, there are times to have conversations about whether or not corporate America in general has enough women or people of color. We've got the Me Too movement. I'm going to be marching this weekend with students down in St. Pete for the Never Again, for a March for Our Lives. I believe in that as well. So there are conversations like that we need to have. But if we can help other companies understand how to approach this from a broader definition and think about diversity as a business enabler instead of a list of projects and initiatives, I think that's the way we can lead by example. Thank you. It's a good question. Any other questions? How are we doing on time here? How many more questions can we take? Okay. Thank you.
This is for my friend who's actually sitting in the back and can't walk down right now. He wants to know, from when you talked about the ad about the tech company, what do you think we as a society can do to make that differentiation between diversity and separation? Or how do you project that going? I think that got his question.
Yeah. I used to work in advertising. And whenever I was asked to run a diversity ad, what I would always try to steer away from was trying to capture every aspect of diversity from a visual standpoint, diversity of people, right? And I try to stay away from some of the cliche stuff like boxes of crayons or, or a rainbow or something like that, where you're just trying to, I really try to just have the messaging deliver what the organization's commitment to diversity was. So any time that you try to depict, every aspect of diversity in a photograph of people, you're going to fall short, right? So where's the person in the wheelchair? Where's the African American? Where's the Hispanic? And again, if you're looking at these people, how do you know how they identify, right? So I think one of the things the organizations can do to steer clear of running into that kind of turmoil is to not try to depict every single aspect of diversity visually when you're doing advertising. And quite frankly, I think it's somewhat condescending. I don't need a company to put a picture of a black person in an ad to let me know they either want me to come work for them or they want my business, right? Just tell me, what your commitment is, and quite frankly, I'm probably going to do my own research to ascertain whether or not you're truly committed anyway. So I think one of the things they can do is to stop trying to depict every aspect of diversity visually along the human spectrum, if you will. Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for one more. Is that right? A couple more? Okay.
Going off of what you said at the tail end of that last answer about diversity, as we're all young professionals going into the workplace, if we notice issues or there's something that comes up with problems with diversity, or we see someone having problems with that as being objectified and have stigmas put against them, is there something that we can do in a position as an employee, not in a position as a manager? Or would you simply suggest going to a manager? I mean, you obviously deal with diversity. Is there a way that you suggest we can help to mediate that?
Yeah, so the question is you're embarking upon your careers and you see something happening that's not right. Maybe somebody's not being treated the way they should be or objectified. What do? It's easy for me as a 49-year-old to say, if you see something, say something. But when I was your age, it wasn't that easy. So I'm just going to keep it real with you. I probably would not have said something. I probably would have gone along to get along. I was not as comfortable in my skin as I am now. Quite frankly, I do think that your generation is a lot more comfortable in your skin at your age than I was at my age. So I would say, I would still challenge you to say something. Look at what's happening. Again, I don't mean to make this political by any stretch, but look at what's happening with the gun rights conversation. That's being driven by 15, 16, 17-year-olds. So I don't think, I think gone are the days where just because you have gray hair, which I have on the inside, I think gone are the days that just because you have gray hair means that you have all the wisdom. So I think I would encourage you that if you see something, say something. But certainly, if you're not comfortable with that and that's not your personality, go through the right channels. But I don't think you should. You have to decide whether or not you'd be willing to not say something and be able to live with yourself. You have to look at yourself in the mirror every day. You have to lay your head on the pillow at night. And if you're comfortable doing that, then more power to you. But if you see something, I would challenge you to say something. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And you can always start a hashtag.
Hello.
Hi.
So as you mentioned, we should identify ourselves or define ourselves based on our experience, right?
Yeah.
So I define myself as Asian based on my experience. So do you have any suggestion of being successful while the opportunity are not equal to everyone?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part of that.
Okay, so do you have any suggestions on being successful while the opportunities are not equal to everybody?
Yeah, so the question is, do I have any suggestions on how to be successful when opportunities are still not equal or are not equitable for everybody?
Exactly.
Look, will you ever encounter somebody who's racist or sexist? Probably so. I can't guarantee that's never going to happen. The best advice I can give you is to focus on you and what you can do and make sure that you don't settle for being in an environment that's not conducive to your success. That's one thing I did learn early on as a professional. I learned that I was never going to allow somebody else to manage my career for me. I was going to take control of that. And if that meant leaving the environment I was in to go to another one, then I would do that. I would say the one piece of advice I would give you is to make yourself indispensable. You're not going to always be the smartest person in the room, but the other thing that you need to remember and recognize and hold true as people entering the professional workforce, even the CEO of the organization had a first day on the job. So I talk to so many young people who get so intimidated by walking into this environment where people have been there for 20 or 30 years. They weren't born into that job. They all had a first day, right? So there's some things you bring to the table. There's some things you know that they don't know, that you need to be comfortable with, and you need to own that. So I would say the best thing you can do is to make yourself indispensable. You know, I've always said the way I want to manage my career is I want to make it such that this company can't imagine what it would be like if I wasn't here, right? So that's all you can do. You can't control things outside of your control. You can control the controllables. And what are the controllables? The controllables are how hard you work, how much you look to learn and grow, and you know, you have the option of being in the environment that works for you. Nobody's going to hold a gun to your head to make you stay at a company that doesn't work for you, right? So I would encourage you to exercise that option early in your career before you realize it's too late in your career and you're at a point where you just want to settle. Okay. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for your advice.
Thank you. All right, I think I'm getting that sign. Do we have time for one more, or are we literally done? We are done. I can talk to you afterwards, but he's giving me the you can't take any more questions. So as we wrap up, I just wanted to share with you 3 things that I'm reading. Actually, Beyond Race and Gender, I've read over and over again. I would encourage you to read that. It sets the framework for thinking about diversity broader than gender and ethnicity. And I'm currently reading, or just finished, Radical Inclusion, and also just finished We Can't Talk About That at Work, which helps you, it's a great guidebook for having conversations about some of these very emotionally charged issues that we're dealing with today. So, hey, thank you all. I would love to come back if you'll have me back. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Now, on behalf of Ball State, the Miller College of Business, and PSC, Pi Sigma Epsilon, I'd like to present this to you.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming out and doing this event. Also, we're going to be having a meet and greet for about 15 to 20 minutes in the main lobby out there, if you'd like to come meet David. Also, Megan Anderson, a member of Pi Sigma Epsilon, is going to be out there. So if you're interested in joining a business fraternity that puts on events like this throughout the year, then please go talk to her. Thank you.
Thank you.